In our previous video, I showed you how to make these awesome bowls on the miter saw. Yes, I said the miter saw. If you're interested in that video, I'll put a link in the description and right up here, so make sure you check it out. Now, even though these bowls are really cool to make and really accessible for most people without a lathe, there's a real big downside to this, and that is the sanding and sanding and sanding that it takes to clean up one of these bowls. And unfortunately, with this being a curved round surface, means you're gonna have to do most of your sanding by hand, which means possible hand cramps and, well, just takes a long time. But I wanted to make this a little bit easier for you. So I looked at my orbital sander. Well, it's too wide and just too flat to work in this surface. I then tried one of these little nylon sanding wheels that fits in your drill, and I tested it out right here on the edge, and it's a little hard to see, but it actually created worse grooves than a miter saw, so that's out. So this got me thinking, wait, the people that actually have a lathe and make bowls with them, what do they use? That's when I discovered these little 2-inch hook and loop sanders that hook in your drill. And they come with these, I believe it's called a foam interference pad that fits right on the end there. And as you see, it flexes as pressure gets put on there. So in other words, as it's going around curves, it'll flex around those curves, allowing you to sand it much easier. But I may have another problem with this. When you're thinking about a lathe, usually the bowl or whatever they're sanding is turning really, really fast, and then they're using the sandpaper to smooth it out. So would this actually work on a product that's sitting still? I don't know. Let's find out. Let me show you the kit I bought so you kind of know what's going on. I have 2 different sanders with a variety of attachments to hit a variety of tools, and 12 different sanding pads, all in different sizes, going from 80 grit all the way up to 3000. So if this is to work, it should be really nice. To use these little sanders, I'm going to use my 90-degree drill. That way I can kind of angle it down and it's not so awkward. Of course, if you don't have one of these 90 degrees, you can use these in a regular drill, but there's a good chance you're going to be kind of over it and in an awkward shape. In those cases, it might be easier to actually put your project on its side and try and sand it that way, but just keep in mind, you're probably going to be pushing it away, making it a little bit more difficult. Of all the little adapters that go into the little sanding pad, I'm going to use the little hex piece because it fits in a drill real nice and it doesn't slip. The bowl I'm going to work with has a few deep little grooves. It may not be real easy to see in the camera, but these are some really deep grooves and look pretty nasty in person. So I'm going to start off with the 80 grit because I believe it'll knock down these grooves really fast. I'm hoping it's not going to be too aggressive, so let's find out. And just like your standard hook and loop system, the sandpaper fits right on and sticks nicely. It's also a good idea if your drill has a variable speed. For example, I can go slow, or I can go fast, or somewhere in between, and that'll allow me to sand all this out without overheating it. Because if you overheat the sanding pad, you're going to melt this hook and loop that's under here, rendering this useless. And now for the moment of truth. I've noticed it kind of jumps around as I'm sanding, and that's nice. It almost acts like a random orbital sander, even though it's not. As you can see here, while I'm angling the drill, the foam is flexing really nice around these curves, so I have a feeling this is going to work really well. So let's keep going. I'm also moving around this bowl a lot to minimize the heat buildup on this pad and on the wood, so hopefully it won't overheat. After about a minute of sanding, I noticed it's a little difficult to use the sander with one hand and hold the wood with one hand, so it's probably a good idea to clamp your project down and then use both hands so you can kind of direct your drill a little bit easier. I just realized that this setup does not kick up nearly as much dust as, say, my random orbit sander, or for that matter, any of my other sanders. This is very similar to hand sanding. You're going to get dust all over your project, possibly your clothes, but it's not going to get as much airborne as you would with some of your other sanders. I still recommend good airflow and possibly a respirator if you're susceptible to that, but overall, I like that. Also, looking at the pad here, you'll notice that the center of it doesn't get much wear and tear. It's usually about the outer third or so of the pad because it is the part that is flexing around the curve. So keep in mind that even though this outer pad might wear out, save these because you can always use that inner pad for other projects. After about a minute of sanding, these deep grooves that I mentioned earlier are coming out nicely. They still got a little ways to go, but after only about a minute of sanding, they're a lot more smooth than it would be with hand sanding. And after just a few minutes of sanding, I got out all of those major grooves and it's feeling really smooth. But I also want to mention that if you try and run this in reverse, there's a very good chance it's going to just fall off if you've only hand tightened this. So if you want to do that, make sure you tighten this down really tight. And looking at the pad, I want to show you that it's still in really good shape. So this is probably pretty good quality paper, and it appears that I can use this on several projects. I'm now going to swap over from the 80 grit to the 120 grit to see how fine of a finish I can get on this wood. After working with the 120 grit, I swapped over to 240, and the inside of this bowl is super smooth. Now, if you look closely at the pads, you'll notice both of them have a little bit more wear and tear than the 80 grit did, but these are still in good shape, so if you have multiple bowls, you can use one pad for multiple pieces. It's now time for comparison. These are the same pieces of wood from the same tree, so they should be pretty similar in how they feel. Now, I did put a finish on this one earlier, so it's not exactly the same, but it should be really, really close. Now, let's do a quick test. I feel grooves, I feel bumps. It definitely is not smooth in there. Now, this one right here was hand sanded, and I probably spent 20 to 30 minutes trying to hand sand this, and it's still a poor job. Now the new one, oh man, it's almost glass smooth. There might be a hint of something here and there, but so much better than this, and I might have 10 minutes of sanding in this. So this kit definitely works. Here's one more glimpse of this kit. Like I said, it has 2 sanding pads, fits in most tools, and goes from 80 to 3000. Now in most cases, you won't go above 240 or 320 for wood, but if you're doing some kind of epoxy project or something that needs some real fine finishing, 3000 should do that. Overall, great kit, and I highly recommend it. If by chance you're interested in purchasing one of these little sanding kits, I'll put a link to that in the description, so make sure you check it out. And if you're interested in seeing how I used a miter saw to create these cool looking bowls, I'll put a link to that in the description, right up here and at the end of this video. Now it's time to help out fellow woodworkers. If you by chance know of any ideas besides this little 2-inch foam sander that'll sand out the inside of a curve, like an inside of a bowl, please list that in the comments. I'd love to hear about it, and everybody else who watches this video would love to know that as well. Now it's time for you to get out in your shop and have fun building.